Okay, so this is a continuation of our previous tutorial where we had a top fragment communicating with a bottom fragment. In that example, we just sent the origin and destination strings from the top fragment via the activity and displayed them in a text view in the bottom fragment. So what we're going to start here with in this tutorial is change the bottom fragment to a list fragment so that every time they click on find flights it will add an extra item into the list. So the first method to implement when you extend ListFragment is OnActivity Created. Which is a method of the fragment class, a lifecycle method. Okay, so this is at the point that this fragment and its parent activity, everything has been created. So the first thing we'll want to do here is set up an adapter to translate the data that's coming into the list and allow it to be displayed in this list. Now, before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about Model View Controller. So already in this project, I've implemented a controller package and a model package. So let's look in the model first. Here I've just written a simple flight object. Nothing special here. This is just a regular Java flight object with origin, destination, getters and setters. And I've overridden string or toString here to return a nice string representation of this object. So the origin string and then a dash and then the destination string. So that's our model object. So what should happen is that an instance of one of these should get created every time the user clicks on the Find Flight button in the top fragment. So let's move up to our controller layer, which I've already written here as well. This is a singleton. So it's written in the normal singleton way with a static instance, a private controller, private constructor, and a public static getInstance method. So standard singleton pattern. So what I do here in the constructor is I refer to this instance variable that I've created here. So this is the controller's link to the model. So our simple model in the case of this app is an array list of flight objects. So when this controller gets created, it creates an empty list of flights, which is an empty data model. So there are two methods then on this controller, one called addFlight, which takes a string origin and string destination. So that allows it to take strings coming down from the GUI, in this case an Android app, but this would also work with a Swing app or talking to a web interface. It's receiving raw data from the GUI. It's then packaging it up inside a new instance of the flight object and adding that to the list of flights. And finally here I have a getFlights method which just returns the entire list. So essentially that's the controller returning a reference to the data model, which the GUI can use to populate itself. So bearing that in mind, let's move back to our bottom fragment class, which extends ListFragment. So what we want here is to get the list of flights from the controller that we want to display. So here it's main controller dot get instance dot get flights. And that will return us an array list of flight objects. We'll call that flights. So that is what we want to display in this list. So remember here that this is our list fragment, this class. This is the data that we want to display, and we need an adapter in the middle. So let's declare an instance of ArrayAdapter there, which is going to store flight objects. So we now create our instance of adapter. So it's new ArrayAdapter. And the context is our activity, so that's get activity. Then we use the layout constant here to dictate that it is adapting to display a simple list item. And finally, put the argument false, say that we don't want to be associated, linked to the activity. Sorry, I meant to say that this is the raw data. This takes in the list of flights. Okay, so that's the adapter set up with its data. So finally what we do here is we say set list adapter, so call a method of this list fragment and give it the adapter that we've just set up. Okay, so this is our bottom fragment, so it's ready to display flight objects. So let's move to our top fragment. So here we don't have to do a whole lot. It's already set up that it takes the origin and destination strings out of the spinners and it calls through its interface, flight searcher, and sends them up to the activity. So that's all done. However, in addition to sending it off to the activity, what it also needs to do is add this data down to the controller and ultimately to the model. So it does that by calling the controller and the add flight method, which we mentioned earlier on. So this takes the selected origin string and the selected destination string. So it does two jobs here. It calls out to the controller to put the data into the model, and then it sends the information on through the activity to the bottom fragment. Now, in fact, if we think about it here, it doesn't really need to send the information to the bottom fragment anymore. What it needs to do is still send a message, but tell the bottom fragment to refresh itself from the updated model. So we can change our interface here a little bit. We no longer need to pass this data. And we could perhaps change the name of that method to something more meaningful. So we can call it refresh flight list. Okay, so that now means our activity goes into error because the interface has changed. So let's just change it here. We're no longer receiving those parameters, and we are implementing this method. Okay, so we still do the same thing inside here. We still want to look up the bottom fragment and send a message to it. However, now we need to decide what we want the bottom fragment to do. So what we want to do here is have a method that's called from outside to tell this fragment to refresh itself. So say refresh list, and the way we do that is on the adapter we call notify data set changed, which will cause the instance of the ArrayAdapter here to have another look at the flights array list and see if it's changed. So finally, back up to main activity here, the method that we want to call from the activity is the one we just wrote in the bottom fragment called refresh list. So if we now have a look at this app running, what we'll see is the same top fragment we always saw with our spinners and our find flights, but now when we click on find flights we see a new list item appears below. If we change our top selections in the spinner, click find flights, we see another list item appears. And so on. List fragment is that when we click on a list item, that the flight object behind that list item gets passed to a new activity that we're going to launch. Okay, so let's go and create our new activity first. So create a new class here called FlightView activity, which extends activity. Okay, and as with all activities, the most important method is the onCreateView. So let's override that. Okay. Beg your pardon, that's onCreate, not onCreateView. So there we go, onCreate. Okay, so what do we want to do here? Well, the first thing we're going to need is an XML GUI file for this activity. So we go down here to our layout and create a new Android XML file. So similar to the way we did for each individual fragment. So let's call this activity underscore flight view .xml and make a relative layout. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is just add in a text view and call it flight display field in our new activity. So this will just be for displaying the flight object that we pass over from the list fragment. So let's go back here to our activity. And what we want to do here is, as with other activities, we want to call on the layout file, so the one we just created, to populate this activity. Okay, so now let's go back to our bottom fragment, and here we want to do something when the item in the list is clicked. So to do that, we override a method of ListFragment called onListItemClick. And here what we want to do is create our intent for launching the new activity. So that's done like this. So we create a new instance of intent. Our context is our activity, which we'll call by calling getActivity, and this is our new activity class that we've just written over here. The next thing we want to do is, using this position here, which is the selected index in the list fragment, we want to get the corresponding item or flight object which is in our model. So we do that like this. we call the controller and get the flight lists, and within that list we get the item at the position dictated by what's selected in the list fragment. So the list of flights is an exact reflection of the array list of flights in the model, and here we have our selected flight. So we want to put that into the bundle now that's going to the new activity as a serialized object. So we just quickly go to flight and make it implement serializable. And then go back to our bottom fragment. So as we know, every intent has an extra bundle attached to it called extra. So we simply put our flight object into that bundle with the key of our choice, and we call start activity. So now let's jump to our new activity which gets launched in response to a list item click. So over here we want to take the serialized flight object out of the bundle. Now bear in mind it is not this bundle here. That's the one that we talked about, which is for saving instant state. We're talking about the bundle attached to the intent. So we do get intent, get serializable extra, and pass in our key, which we use to store it in the extra before it was passed over from the fragment. And then we cast our result to a flight object and declare a variable here called flight. And finally here we just want to display the toString representation of this object in this activity to show that we have received it. So we look up the text view of this activity. So we do find view by ID or .id, and the field here in this activity is called flight display field. So we can just check that in our XML, and there it is. This is the XML that belongs to our new activity. So we cast our returned view here to a text view because we know it's a text view, and import text view above. So finally we have our text view in our new activity here. We have the object which we want to display. So we do text view dot set text, and we want the flight dot toString. So one final thing we need to do here to allow this new activity to work is to register it in the Android manifest.xml file. So if we come over here, we can see that our main activity is already there. So we add in some code for our FlightView activity. So if we just have a look at this, we've Android name is the full path to our new activity class. Android label is just, we're just using the same as up above. That's the title that appears on the activity. Here we have a new attribute called Android parent activity name, where we point it at its parent activity. finally we have a bit of metadata here, again used to point at the parent activity. So name and value. So finally, if we run this, and we click on some flights here, we find that if we click on one in the list, it launches a new activity and has received the flight object and displayed it for us here. And we can automatically go back and obviously keep working with our original activity, which is composed of the two fragments.